What if Jesus' resurrection is about more than just giving us new life, but it's about saving us from shame right now? I'm Pastor Nate. This is another episode of the Sunday School Remix. We're looking at John chapter 21 today and the story of the miraculous catch and Peter's redemption. Here we go. Welcome to the Sunday School Remix, the show where we take Bible stories you learned as a kid and look at them with fresh eyes. Each week, we dig into the context and the overlooked details, and we often discover interpretations we never heard growing up. This isn't about winning arguments, but simply hearing God's living word speak to our lives again today. So grab your Bible and put aside your assumptions, and let's dive into another episode of the Sunday School Remix. So the story takes place after Jesus has been raised from the dead. The beloved disciple and Peter have gone to the tomb and found it empty. And then later that day, we're told, is when Jesus appears and they put their hands in the wounds, doubting Thomas, all that good stuff. But it's clear as we look at this story that there's still something bothering our guy Peter. And so the story starts out with Peter saying, hey, I'm going fishing. And he heads off to go fishing, and some of the disciples come along. And this is a significant point because fishing is what the disciples used to do. That was their old job before Jesus called them to be disciples. And so this is Peter going back to his old way of life. Clearly, there's still something unsettling the guy. He doesn't know what else to do, so he just returns to what's familiar. And so they go out fishing, and they fish all night, and they don't catch anything. And that's when Jesus appears on the shore. Only they don't know yet that it's Jesus. And it's really funny because it's like Jesus sort of trolling them a little bit. He's like, hey, did you catch anything? Like, no, we haven't caught anything. He's like, well, what if you tried throwing your net on the other side of the boat? And so they throw their net on the other side of the boat, and they catch 153 fish. Now, when the Bible gives us really specific details like this, like a very specific number, it's good to do some investigating to try and find out why that might be. It's often there very intentionally. And in this case, what scholars think is that 153 was the number of known nations in the world at that time. So the disciples have caught 153 fish. In other words, they've caught one fish for every nation of the world. And as you think back to their original calling by Jesus, Jesus called them to be fishers of men. And so there's a lot of pieces interweaving here. The disciples go back to their old way of life, but then Jesus miraculously helps them catch 153 fish. It's as if he's calling them back to their real task, which is to share his message with all nations of the world. Pretty cool how that little detail fits in with all this. But the story gets even better from there. Because after they catch the 153 fish, the beloved disciple says, oh my gosh, it's Jesus. It is the Lord. He figures it out. And this is particularly the way that his personality is described all throughout the gospel. He's the one who seems to figure things out, who sees, who believes, who understands. And Peter is often held up as the one who's a little bit impulsive and springs into action right away, maybe not thinking about things first. And of course, in our story, that's exactly what happens. The beloved disciple says, it is the Lord. And Peter's like, wait, what? And he puts on his clothes and jumps in the Sea of Tiberias to swim ashore. Now, there's a lot going on with our guy, Peter, at this point in time. Apparently, he was fishing naked, like you do. I don't know. And then, when he finds out that it's Jesus, he puts his clothes on to jump in the water and swim ashore. And what's even better is we find out just a little later in the passage that once he arrives on shore, the boat arrives at basically the same time. So he could have just stayed in the ship and sailed ashore and kept his clothes from getting wet. I digress. The important part about all these details is it's giving us a picture of Peter's character. He is distraught. He's upset. He is still processing something in his head, and he's not thinking completely straight. And on a more symbolic level as well, the putting on of clothes is very significant. On this podcast previously, we talked about the story of Adam and Eve in the garden. And as soon as they found out the knowledge of good and evil and ate the forbidden fruit, they felt shame. And so they hid themselves from God, and they made clothing out of fig leaves to cover themselves. Shame and clothing get interconnected in the Bible. And so Peter is fishing naked. That's its own thing. But then when he finds out that it's God, or Jesus on the shore, I should say, he puts clothing on to cover his shame. He still feels ashamed of something. That is what the text is trying to point us towards. And once he arrives on shore, there's Jesus. And he's already made them a charcoal fire. And he says the best line in the whole Bible, "Come and have breakfast." It really says that. John 21:12, my favorite verse in the entire Bible. A well-balanced breakfast is commanded by the Lord. But I want to dig back a little bit and think about Peter for a second here. He has witnessed something incredibly traumatic, and that can't be understated. I think I brought this up when we were talking about doubting Thomas as well. Just what a tumultuous week that must have been for the disciples. To ride in on Sunday and see their rabbi welcomed as a king, and then to have it turn so quickly into something incredibly tragic and traumatic. To see your rabbi crucified would have been an immensely disturbing experience. And Peter has the added layer of guilt because Jesus told him that he would deny him 3 times, and Peter said, "No way, that's never going to happen." And then, of course, it did. So not only does he have the trauma of the experience of losing his rabbi and seeing him crucified, but then he has the additional guilt of denying him at this moment when Jesus was in an incredibly difficult situation. And so you put all that together and you start to understand why he just goes back to fishing. And you start to understand why he was fishing naked and putting on his clothes. He's not thinking straight. And if you've ever been through a very traumatic experience, you know what that feels like and how your brain just can't work in the normal ways that it used to. And yes, at this point in the story, Peter has good reason to believe that Jesus has been resurrected, but it's still clear that there's more going on underneath the surface. And so Jesus has a charcoal fire made, and they eat breakfast together. And this is really significant in its own way as well, because it's showing them that Jesus is actually alive. As you look through the stories in Scripture, again and again, when Jesus appears after the resurrection, he is not just some sort of apparition. He often asks for something to eat, or he eats with the disciples. Because ghosts do not eat. Apparitions do not need food. And Jesus seems to be intentionally trying to prove to whoever he's with that he actually is alive in some different sort of way, but he is alive. He eats just like a human being. This is not some sort of vision. This is bodily resurrection. And in the scheme of our theological thought, bodily resurrection is really significant. We believe, again, not that just Jesus reappeared, but that he was raised from the dead. And I point to that fact in preaching funeral sermons all the time, because it really is such a gift for us to believe that in the resurrection of the body. That's what it says in the Apostles' Creed. I believe in the resurrection of the body. And that means that this frail person that you maybe encountered, who was on their deathbed and just deteriorated over the last weeks and months of their life, when they're raised in the resurrection, it's not like they're raised as that frail, feeble individual. No, it's a bodily resurrection. It is a restoration of that person. This is a really significant place to point to with mental illness, when someone's mind has betrayed them and led them into difficult places. When they're resurrected, that part of them is healed too. That's what bodily resurrection points us to. It's what the hope that belief provides us with. And so, getting back to our story, Jesus is really alive, and he's eating breakfast with the disciples around a charcoal fire. And now I keep emphasizing that detail because it's a very specific word choice in the original Greek. There are other fires mentioned in John's gospel, but it only mentions a charcoal fire on 2 occasions. Here on the beach after Jesus is resurrected, and then once before when Peter denied Jesus in John 18. We're told that when Peter denied Jesus, he was standing around a charcoal fire having a conversation. And so what Jesus is doing is causing Peter to be back in that moment, to be drawn back. We know that smell has such strong links to memory, and a charcoal fire has a very distinct smell to it. And so Peter is once again standing around a charcoal fire, and you know that it's causing him to think back to that moment that he feels so ashamed of. And that's what makes what happens next so significant. Jesus is drawing him back to that moment that he would like to forget in order to redeem and forgive that moment. There they are, standing around the charcoal fire. And Jesus says, "Peter, do you love me?" Peter says, "Yes, Lord, you know I love you." "Okay, then feed my sheep." "Peter, do you love me?" He asks him again. "Yes." "Okay, great. Tend my lambs." A third time. "Peter, do you love me?" "Yes, you know I love you." "Great. Feed my sheep." On 3 occasions, Peter denied Jesus while standing around a charcoal fire. And now Jesus is giving him the opportunity to 3 times affirm his love and commitment to Jesus, and to give him a purpose built on that love and commitment. You see, this story is helping us see that resurrection is not just about life after death someday. It's about life right now and being redeemed and forgiven and brought into a new way of life right now. Our past does not have to define us forever, because the resurrection is a promise that new life can come even from our sin, our mistakes, our guilt, our shame, all those things that we want to forget. God can still work with that and recast it into something new. And so Peter gets called forward despite the fact that he denied Jesus 3 times. He's given 3 chances to affirm. And now he's called forth again to tend and to feed and to care for Jesus's sheep. It's another call story. Peter thought that because of his sin and his mistakes and his denial, that he needed to go back to his old way of life. But Jesus is saying, no, I'm redeeming that. And you are still called forward with a purpose. And as we think about how this relates to our own lives, it's so significant, because we do get caught in thinking that our worst mistakes define us. And God kind of agrees with that, but says, no, these worst mistakes can be redeemed and can become so much more significant once they've been redeemed and been put into process in my mission. Let me give you an example. You think about the convicted felon who then rehabs his life in prison and then starts a prison ministry afterwards. Because of his history, because of who he was, he is so much more equipped to speak to the inmates that he's ministering to. This is what redemption looks like. It's God taking that part that you wish didn't happen, but then saying, no, this can make you such a more authentic witness, such a more authentic minister, because I've redeemed that and still called you forth. The Apostle Paul, who was Saul, the persecutor of Christians, his story is so significant because of his history and the way that it was redeemed. Because he had once been a persecutor, suddenly everyone was listening to him so much more. It's like, wait, what happened to this guy that now he's at a completely different perspective, a completely new life? This is what resurrection is about as well. It's not just life after death. It's life right now in a new, redeemed way. And so there's so much that we can take from this. And I think it's such a more generous picture of what God does for us through this Easter moment. As we know, Peter will go forth and become an incredible evangelist for the church throughout the world. Maybe not to all 153 nations, but his work will help jumpstart that movement, living out that call. So there you go, a whole bunch of thoughts on this story that I'm guessing you've probably heard before, but as you dig into the details, I hope you enjoy just seeing all the significance of what's been written there, of what God is trying to communicate to us through these ancient words. I'm Pastor Nate. This has been another episode of the Sunday School Remix. As always, remember, friends, the story doesn't end in Sunday school. Thanks for listening to another episode of Sunday School Remix. If you'd like more resources for your walk of faith, feel free to check out my church's website, bethany-denver.org, or you can download our mobile app by searching Bethany Connect in your phone's app store.